All right, so we're back again here with another video today. In this video, I'm going to be going over or comparing Asad Elixir from Lattafa. I'm going to be comparing that with the fragrance that is basically inspired by, which is Boss Bottled Absolu from Boss. All right, so I think I did like a first impressions video of this fragrance like maybe a week or two ago or so. And this is a solid, fragrance within that sort of Lattafa Asad line for sure. For me, it would definitely be up there like with the Asad bourbon. I think I will say though, like after kind of wearing this, especially wearing it side by side with the original, I think I would have to say that Asad bourbon would probably still be like my favorite. Then it would be this one, and then obviously you would have like the original Asad, and then for me like my least favorite one would be the Asad Zanzibar. Um, Now, again, this is still a very solid fragrance. I just think that the original, it just does the scent profile a little bit better. All right. So we'll get into that here in just a moment. First things first, I'm going to start off with the notes of both fragrances. So for Boss Bottle Absolu, and that one, you're going to get, what is it? The top notes are going to be incense and leather. And then in the mid, you get patchouli and myrrh. And in the base, you get cedarwood and davana. Now, for the Asad elixir, this one in the top notes, you're going to get pink pepper, grapefruit, and saffron. In the mid, you get tobacco, cedar, and vanilla. And then in the base, you get frankincense, patchouli, light amber, and cashmere. So what do I get in terms of differences between these two fragrances? What I would say is this to me, the Lattafa, it does come across as like I guess you could say slightly more kind of like fruitier, less smoky and less leathery version of the scent profile. And, because of that, I'll also say that it does smell to me a little bit less masculine than what the Boss Bottle Absolute does. So yeah, that would be like my biggest takeaway from comparing these two scents. Um, I still would say that the Lattafa is definitely still a pretty decent scent, and especially again once this goes down in price, which I'm sure it'll probably be anywhere from like 3 to 6 months. When that happens, once this starts getting into like that like $30 to $40 range or so, I would say that this is still definitely one of the better sort of Lattafa Asad fragrances that you can pick up. But just objectively speaking, if I'm judging the two side by side and just kind of going off of which one I actually preferred wearing, I would say that the Boss Bottle Absolu, at least for me anyway, seemed to be the better smelling scent on me. And like I said, it's more so due to the fact that it just came across a little bit more masculine, a little bit more sort of rugged, and just, in my opinion, a little bit more kind of like unique. This to me, the Lattafa version, the Asad Elixir, it does kind of come across to me a little bit more safer, but also you could say more sort of like versatile. So I would say that you could probably get away with wearing the Lattafa Asad Elixir maybe in more situations than you could the Boss Bottle Absolute. But for like the specific sort of situations or occasions where you would probably want to wear this scent profile, I just think that the original Boss does it a little bit better. Um, Again, the biggest thing that I noticed was like in the initial opening of the two fragrances, the Boss is heavier on that incense note, so it does come across a little bit more smokier. And I would say the leather and like the or the incense and the myrrh, those are definitely more prominent in the Boss, and then the leather is also much more prominent in the Boss as well. I mean, really, I can't, and I don't see it in the note breakdown for the Lattafa either. But I was gonna say I really don't smell too much leather in this fragrance at all. But it is definitely prominent in the Boss. And I mean, I don't know if maybe if my taste is just sort of changing as I smell more scents that have leather in them. But like typically, leather is not necessarily my thing when it comes to most scents. But I actually do like it a lot. The way it's actually done in the Boss fragrance. And even though the Boss Bottle Absolute doesn't like have a tobacco note listed, to me it does actually smell like it has like some tobacco in it as well. It's definitely pretty light and in the background for sure, but it kind of has like that tobacco type of smell that you would get, like a really kind of light, airy sort of tobacco. But it still has sort of like that sort of slightly sweet but kind of earthy sort of smell that you get from something like tobacco and a lot of fragrances. Whereas with the Lattafa, like I said, the Lattafa is definitely, it's not as smoky. I mean, it really doesn't have much smokiness at all to it. It's definitely a lot fresher to me, fruitier, and it doesn't have like that sort of leathery aspect to it either. I guess you could say that you can definitely smell like some resemblance of like some tobacco in the Lattafa, and it even has it in the note breakdown for the Lattafa. But to me, it smells more. I would say tobacco smells more prominent in the original Boss Bottle Absolu than what it does in the Lattafa, at least in my opinion, anyway. And again, that's what makes the Boss fragrance to me just smell like a little bit more of sort of like a more masculine style fragrance. Not saying that like the Lattafa smells feminine in any sort of way. Like that's not the case at all. I would still definitely say that this is absolutely still a masculine scent. I just think that the Boss Bottle Absolute just smells a little bit more masculine, to be honest with you. Um, Now, to me, the Lattafa Asad Elixir, like in terms of like the texture of the two fragrances, because this comes across slightly more sweeter, less smokier, um, and more sort of fruitier. This does have a slightly, to me, like thicker feel to the fragrance. Whereas I felt like the Boss Bottle Absolute, it was a little bit more kind of like diffusive, especially with it being a little bit more kind of incense and myrrh heavy, smelling more kind of tobacco prominent as well. And then, being a little bit more leathery. And I mean, the leather is not like a thick, heavy leather. Like it's definitely a more of an airy, kind of fresh sort of leather is what I get from this fragrance. Again, mixed kind of like with that tobacco and smokiness that you get from the incense and the myrrh. Um, I prefer the way that the patchouli comes across in the Boss Bottle Absolute. It definitely to me is kind of like more of a dirty sort of patchouli. Whereas in the Lattafa Asad Elixir, it comes across a little bit more kind of like sweetened up and more kind of artificial, I guess you could say. And just, I guess you could say a little bit more sort of mass appealing for the most part. But I mean, at least for me anyway, I just feel like this scent profile this is supposed to be kind of like, a more masculine, uh, more sort of rugged smelling fragrance that a man would wear. So, like I mentioned before in the previous video, this is definitely going to be something that I would say is kind of in the wheelhouse of something like Parfums de Marly's Carlisle. Um, I don't necessarily know if I could say that I prefer Carlisle over this, or I think both are actually really, really good. This would obviously be something that I would more so consider buying, because I would say that the price on this is actually a lot better. The Boss fragrance, Boss Bottle Absolu. I think I've seen like a full bottle of that go for like around $100 or so on discounters. So it's definitely more accessible than something like the Parfums de Marly, where a lot of those Parfums de Marly fragrances, they don't really seem to be discounted as much as they used to be like in previous years. So typically those, even like on a discounter site per se, will be like over $300. Um, and I mean, Carlisle, I think it's a good scent, but I wouldn't pay $300 for it. This Boss Bottle Absolute, I would say, is definitely worth at least about, probably 80 to $100 for sure. And it's going to be like that sort of cooler weather, like fall, winter, spring. Um, I would say probably more so towards like the night, but I mean, I would still definitely wear this fragrance during the day, especially on like more kind of like overcast, cold, more kind of like gloomy sort of days. This would definitely be something that I would still rock during the day. Absolutely. But I do still think that this would be like a pretty solid like date night fragrance. Um, for the most part all year round, especially if you live somewhere where it doesn't get super hot in the summertime at night. So it still definitely has some versatility to it. I just think that the Lattafa, you could possibly say, has a little bit more versatility to it. It has a slightly younger sort of smell to it. The quality, I think, is also, it's not necessarily as good as what it is in the Boss fragrance, but it is still the Lattafa Asad Elixir is still a pretty solid fragrance in terms of quality. Like, this still doesn't smell cheap, but it just doesn't, in my opinion, smell as high quality as what the Boss does. All right, so that's my take on the smell, man. I would say this is still definitely a solid fragrance. I just happen to prefer the original a little bit more. All right. Now, for the performance on Asad Elixir, performance on this is actually going to be solid. So you're going to get at least 8 hours of total longevity with this fragrance. And, I would say for probably like the first 2.5 hours, it actually does project pretty well, man. Like I said, to me, it's not as diffusive as what the Boss is. The Boss fragrance is definitely more diffusive. So I feel like you can kind of perceive that fragrance a little bit more. But this does have a slightly more kind of like heavier feel to it, in my opinion. All right. So projection is pretty good on this. I would say at least about an arm's length or so for like the first, again, 2.5 hours. Solid longevity, at least about 8. And in terms of my closeness rating on this, to me, I would say this is at best probably about 80% Boss Bottle Absolu. So, not the most terrible interpretation of that scent profile in the world, but it's not going to be like, in my opinion, like super close. Like, it's not a 90% plus close interpretation of the Boss Bottle Absolute scent profile. So, still pretty solid. Just definitely more of kind of like a more mass appealing, I guess you could say. Less masculine twist on that particular scent profile. As for my overall rating on this I would say is like a solid probably 7.5 to 8 out of 10. So it's definitely still a fragrance that, I would definitely recommend to people, especially if you're just somebody who you're not going to spend like $100+ on the Boss fragrance, then, this would still be a solid choice. I know with a lot of Boss fragrances, it seems like, over time, a lot of them actually become like really cheap. So, who knows, maybe in like a year or two, Boss Bottle Absolu might end up being like 60, $70 for like a full 100 ml bottle. I don't know, but I would say if it does get down to that point and you have the option to choose either that or maybe this for like, $30 to $40. At me personally, I would just spend the extra money and get the original Boss fragrance. And then, let's say for instance, if they're having like a sale right now, like a Black Friday or a Christmas sale or something like that, and like Boss Bottle Absolute goes down to, I don't know, like $80 or something like that, and this is still like around that $50 mark. I would still definitely recommend the Boss Bottle Absolute over this. All right, so that's my take on Asad Elixir from Lattafa. Definitely let me know in the comments what you all think about this fragrance, especially if you all have smelled it side by side with the original Boss Bottle Absolute. And if so, which one do you prefer? Which one do you like? Let me know in the comments. Also, I'll have links in the description to where you can pick this up. All right. And if you're brand new to the channel, do me a favor, go ahead and subscribe. And again, that's Jamar from Vegas Sense. I'll see you all in the next video.